I think now your opinion of Liszt is in another direction than it had been for a few days.
I've almost made a complete turnaround. When I first started listening to this program, and of course, you know, you and I sit here and we listen to the music as well as discuss it, I developed the opinion that Liszt was a superfluous composer, very much able, because of his great technical abilities, to play with our emotions, but he was really playing with us. And as time went on, strangely enough, my opinion still holds true that that is the case with certain of his works, and most of the war horses. The things that are really the popular pieces are the ones that are superfluous and superficial,
shallow, manipulative, so everything you think. And they have, of course, their attraction. They've survived. But as we go into the variegated output of this incredible composer, we're seeing so many other aspects to him. And today we have the composer that was so very responsible in many ways for bringing to the latter half of the 19th century its ethnic nationalism, the development of important musicians from the smaller nations. And Grieg would come out of this second half of the 19th century, and Smetana, and Dvorak, Sibelius in Finland, and of course the Russian school would be very, very impressed with Liszt, and this was a newly emerging national school. Liszt watched all of these composers in all of these countries. In his case, with the Hungarian Rhapsodies, he did his job for gypsy music. In fact, wrote a book on gypsy music even.
No, that I didn't
Had
know.
so much productivity in him. It's quite something.
Let me ask you about this rise of nationalism in the smaller countries as far as music was concerned. Was this in any part due really to the revolution in France about that time? Was it really a matter of necessity that all the artists were being driven away from the musical, cultural center of the world at that time, which was Paris, I'm sure?
No, I just think that finally these countries started to find a musical identity, and it couldn't be. Remember, we were discussing Liszt and the Germanic stranglehold on music. It's very important. Liszt was responsible in so many ways for this impetus of nationalism, and his Hungarian Rhapsodies, as hackneyed as some of them were, exposed this kind of folk material, and in some composers it would become a far more important vein than in Liszt's work. Grieg looked to the Norwegian soil. Liszt knew these composers and encouraged this ethnic nationalism. These countries after 1849, some of them, such as Bohemia, finally became politically unchained. So they found an identity of their own, and it was in the folk material of their nations.
Well, do you think that this musical awareness, and maybe here we're getting into a philosophical question about the nature of music, or art in that matter, and politics, I mean, this artistic growth was completely independent from the political realities of the day, pretty much?
No, not completely.
There was some cross-influence.
Sure, absolutely. Now, Liszt was in Spain and was very popular as a pianist there. And he wrote, of course, his Hungarian Rhapsodies, but he wrote a Spanish Rhapsody. Now, he was also the teacher of the great Spanish composer Isaac Albéniz.
That I didn't know.
He was the mentor for the American MacDowell, for Balakirev, for other Russians. He gave Smetana money to open a music school in Prague when that young composer was in great need. He made sure that Grieg had money to compose by writing to the King of Norway. On and on, the stories of Liszt with other composers as a great part of his biography. So it's not just Wagner that he helped. He had his hand everywhere. So we will begin today's program with his only work entitled Spanish Rhapsody. There are 20 Hungarian Rhapsodies, and there is one Romanian Rhapsody. So let's begin with a performance by the pianist Roberto Szidon. Roberto Szidon in Liszt's quite a fabulous work, the Rhapsodie espagnole. How clever. And what Liszt does here is he uses the La Folia, which was immortalized really by Corelli in a work, not Corelli's own tune, but a Spanish, authentic Spanish work, as well as the Jota Aragonesa. And the first part is really like a passacaglia, actually, on the La Folia. You liked that?
Oh, I love that. And as a matter of fact, I was very impressed with that performance. And we were talking about it, and you said, well, everyone knows that. But, you know, that same theme in the second part of the work is used in Glinka's Jota Aragonesa, he calls it.
Absolutely. Yeah. John Ogden writes, as an evocation of Spain, the Spanish Rhapsody had few precedents. Remember, there was no Spanish national school at all in 1863. Absolutely nothing. Albéniz was born in 1860. The musical Hispanicism of Debussy, Ravel, and Szymanowski and the nationalist compositions of Albéniz and Granados were all to come later. The Rhapsody opens, incidentally, with one of the finest cadenzas in Liszt's output, one showing his sensitivity to glittering enharmonic relationships, a feature which occurs many times in the later works. Pianistically, the use of blind octaves is unusually prevalent and exciting. And pianistically, this work is just a wonder. Certainly, parts of it, especially the end, influenced Balakirev's wondrous Oriental fantasia called Islamé, which Liszt very much liked and always had on his piano.
It doesn't sound like a virtuoso showpiece, but it's a very demanding work. I mean,
very demanding.
One senses that, but it's not a show-offy type of thing.
But it takes great flair to play it, and we have a performance as fine as this was certainly fine. There's one by Lazar Berman, which just hits you in the gut, and let's hear it now. I am breathless.
Most pianists, seem to run out of steam at the end of a particular piece. If anything, Berman seems to get stronger.
Absolutely.
And that same impression I've always had. His two hands are not connected to the same body. I mean, just what the left hand is doing and the right hand seem to have no relationship. There's no interaction at all. He keeps them completely separate.
Well, we've just heard some phenomenal performance of the Rhapsodie espagnole of Franz Liszt, composed in 1863. One listener wrote to me recently saying that Liszt is very much alive. He was reincarnated as Lazar Berman. And I'm not privileged to be able to confirm that, as an absolute fact. But his identification with Liszt is quite something. Well, we will be back with one of Liszt's masterworks, a piece called The Funerailles.
Can do for an encore, David, after that?
Well, we will play one of, in my opinion, and many others, a work of elemental greatness, one of the great funeral odes ever written, and that's the Funerailles. But first I had found this passage because we were discussing Liszt's being of great benefit, and to other composers. He was also a very generous man to many people he did not know, and this quote comes from an admirer of his, and Liszt was at his house, and he writes, "Liszt was at my house when a woman was announced to whom I was in the habit of giving quarterly a certain sum for her support. It being a few days before the usual time, she gave as an excuse the hard times. While providing for her, I told Liszt in an undertone that she was an honest but very indigent widow of a painter, deceased in his prime, to whom a number of brother artists were giving regular contributions in order to enable her to get along with her two small children. I confess, while telling him this, I hoped that Liszt, whose liberality and willingness to do good had become almost proverbial, would ask me to add something in his name, and was therefore surprised to see him apparently indifferent, for he answered nothing and continued looking down in silence. After a few days, however, the widow reappeared, her heart overflowing with thankfulness and her eyes filled with tears of joy, for she and her children had, at the expense of a man whose name she was not permitted to know, received beautiful and new winter clothing, while kitchen and cellar had been stored with every necessary for the coming winter. All this had been arranged by the landlady of a certain hotel at which Liszt was then stopping. A piano maker who had not the means to erect a factory needed but to convince Liszt of his rare ability, and immediately he had at his command over 80,000 francs. This man is now dead, and Liszt never had received a farthing of that money back. There are many, many stories like this of Liszt's generosity. But now let's get to the music and the Funerailles, which was composed in 1849, and it comes in a set of 8 pieces, poetic and religious harmonies, and they were works, at least 2 of them are masterpieces, the Funerailles and the Benediction to God and the Solitude, which we will also hear tomorrow. The Funerailles was composed in 1849, and it's a powerfully constructed funeral march of shattering impact, heroic in character, and with a slight Hungarian flavor. These are the words of Louis Kentner. Because the middle section, a long crescendo built on an ostinato left-hand figure, reminds some people of Chopin's A-flat Polonaise, and because in 1 or 2 of the passages Chopin's ghost does seem to appear for a moment or two, it has been suggested that the date of October 1849 in the title of the work refers to the death of his friend Chopin. But Liszt researchers claim to have established that this is not so, and that the grief expressed in the work is a national rather than a personal one, which relates to the victims of the heroic but vanquished Hungarian Revolution of 1848-49. One of the wondrous parts of the Funerailles is the introduction. The clangor of bells builds up to a truly deafening roar. Let's hear the performance by Simon Barere. And that was the Funerailles, one of Simon Barere's specialties.
And I can see why. In fact, I think I alluded to this when we were talking about it. I don't think I've heard a work that made me as uneasy to listen to. I mean, that is really a somber thing.
I was watching you, yeah.
I almost left, and I may not be here tomorrow morning to hear another performance of that.
Well, be here because we have one of the very great performances of this work to begin tomorrow in the hands of Vladimir Horowitz.